prepared any particular remarks. I prepared my heart for this evening. I'm going to say a few, hopefully, nice things here to help bring us that much more together and focus on the program this evening. First of all, my name is Christian DuPont. If we haven't met yet, I'm the Burns librarian, so welcome to our house here. That on behalf of Tom Wall, our university librarian, and all the staff of the Boston College Libraries, and those especially here who work with me in the John J. Burns Library for our rare books, special collections, and archives, that yes, we are very proud of our Irish collections, even those of us who are not Irish, right? Because really outside the island of Ireland, we, especially for modern Ireland, have a wealth of riches here. We don't compete among other Irish libraries or archives. We collaborate, we do things together, but Burns Library certainly has a real place of significance here. And so that's where it's with great celebration this evening that we are welcoming Professor Guy Beiner as the Craig and Maureen Sullivan Millennium Professor of Irish Studies this evening. And that's why we're here this evening, as you all well know. And we regret that Craig was not able to, he passed away in 2017. We remember Craig this evening. We remember Maureen, who's not able to travel this evening. But we have, I lost my place. There we are, Megan, daughter Megan Levinton, who's in front of me here, with her daughter, Jackie, who is a student, a junior this year. And so please, let's just, with warm applause, welcome them and say thank you. So without saying too much to make you blush too much in your cheeks here, to just say that this is one of the benefactions that Craig and Maureen have given through their family and their over time here at Boston College in establishing this chair. Craig was retired as the chairman of the Clorox Corporation. Big company, right? So there we go. And has done many things as a Boston College alumnus for the university, and lived in the family in San Francisco, right? And Mother Maureen has been very involved with the San Francisco Opera House and raising funds for the Conservatory of Music, but also really significantly the Maureen and Craig Sullivan Youth Center in San Francisco, right on the heart of San Francisco. So again, among other family benefactions and the care you bring to communities, across our country. So thank you. We're privileged to have you here. There we go. Okay, good. Spontaneous. Okay. So just to recognize a couple of others in the room, and I'll come back to the Sullivan Chair and some of the other things that we want to celebrate here this evening. We have with us, and you came, Maureen and Jackie, with our Dean of the College of Arts and Sciences, and Father Greg Kauscher is here. Thank you, Greg, for being such an attentive dean to the families here and to all of our students, and thank you for being here this evening. We also have the Consul General of Ireland in Boston with us this evening. And you're looking to your left and your right to find Leisha Moore, who's in the back corner there with her mask on. So thank you, Leisha, for being here. You come to so many of our occasions, you and your consular staff, and we really are grateful for all of the support and the interest and attention that you have in our relationship with Boston College and all the ways in we collaborate to bring Irish culture to greater awareness in the Boston areas and the way it interacts with the many cultures. And I think that's something that those of you who are of privilege to be of Irish descent, those of us who are maybe Greek on my mother's side or French on my father, the immigrant experience is something that many of us share in this country. And so I think that's where I know you, Leisha, and your consular staff, I see Catherine Shannon is here this evening as a longtime president of the Charitable Irish Immigrant Aid Society. That expansive vision, it's not just for those of a particular ethnic descent that we're here to bring together. And again, when we have one of Guy's students introduce Guy, we'll understand why that's such a significant thing to bring. One of the things that I came to, some of you were talking to me earlier about Say Nothing, the book that's made Boston College famous in some circles, and so to understand that it's not all about troubles and not all about political strife. The Irish charisma is really about hospitality. So, you know, when I went to Belfast for my first time after coming here in 2014 as Burns Librarian, I wondered how I might be received. And it was really with hospitality from south to north, from east to west. And so I thank you and the reception that I've received over here the years. And I know that's what you're bringing by being here present tonight this evening. So really, thank you for that. The Sullivan Millennium Chair in Irish Studies. Millennium, yes. So that does refer to the year 2000 thereabouts is when Craig and Maureen endowed this professorship. And those of us here, I'm looking at Sheila, who directs our Gaelic Roots program, will remember, and Sean Smith, who were close collaborators with Seamus Connolly, the great fiddle player and musician who on many years was on our faculty here, retired a few years ago, and he was the Sullivan Artist in Residence. So the Sullivan Endowment has supported many things, and now that's where it's, again, with Professor Beiner here this evening, to become the Professor of History, to carry that Sullivan Chair of Irish Studies, which brings together really the Irish Studies academic programs, along with, you know, our Irish collections in Burns Library, our collaborators in the museum, who have done many Irish exhibitions over the years with Boston College Ireland, and our Irish programs, the Irish Institute, the Global Leadership Institute. Many of us, we remembered him last week at our lecture here with Paul Murray, our friend, our dear friend and colleague, Robert Morrow, who passed away earlier this, at the end of last month. And I know that several of us had conversations remembering Bob this evening. So then this is the community. You know, we come together, we've lost some, we've gained some. Some of you are here for the very first time, and we thank you for that. So I think I might leave my little remarks here, because we're here to celebrate, again, the Sullivans, and then Guy Beiner, and we can't wait for this talk, right? We've been thinking about it for a while here. So Guy's, I would say a lot about Guy myself, but I'm going to save that for one of his students, Rowan Bianchi, who is a second-year master's student here, and that's very characteristic of Guy, to say, I don't need, sorry, Alicia, the Consul General of Ireland, or sorry, Greg, the Dean of the College of Arts and Centers, to introduce me to kind of puff this up. I want a student. So thank you, Rowan, for stepping behind the podium to do this for all of us, and for your professor, Guy Beiner. So thank you.
I will keep my remarks short. Giadich, agus falcha, hello and welcome. My name is Rowan Bianchi, and I have the privilege to be one of the graduate students working with Guy Beiner here at Boston College. Our Irish Studies program must have really impressed him during his tenure as the Burns Scholar in 2019 and 2020, because last fall, Guy Beiner returned as not only a professor of history, but also as the Sullivan Chair of Irish Studies. Since then, Guy has electrified our department with his passion, intensity, and expertise, which transcends both the regional focus of Ireland and the temporal focus of the long 19th century, as exemplified by his recent book, Pandemic Reawakenings, The Forgotten and Unforgotten Spanish Flu of 1918 to 1919. Today, however, he will transcend not just a specific historical period, but the past itself. Many of us in Irish Studies often joke that Guy is the father of memory studies. His work on social remembrance and forgetting has revolutionized the field of Irish history and scholarship of memory as a whole. It is therefore only fitting that today he will expand beyond the history of the past and go into the history of the future. Many of the graduate students in the room will know what it is like to receive a Guy Beiner question. A question that cuts to the very core of your work and forces you to reevaluate all of your presuppositions and assumptions. If Guy has taught us well, perhaps today he will get to receive a famed Guy Beiner question himself. It is my honor, and please join me in welcoming Guy Beiner to give his inaugural Sullivan Chair lecture, Paddies in Space, Irish Studies in the 24th Century. Thank you.
I'll start my talk in about 5 minutes, but before that I have, as a folklorist, I often think in three, so I have 3 comments before I begin, but because I don't adhere to the rule of 3 or any other rules, it'll be 3 comments plus a comment. So the first comment is this. When I first came to BC to take up the chair, a senior colleague in the history department gave me some very good advice and said, he had listened to my job talk when I applied for the job, and said, Guy, make sure that the next time you give a talk that you write it out and read the script. That's very good advice. The only problem is that I'm in Irish studies and I tend to adhere on these issues to Oscar Wilde, who in Ideal Husband famously said, the only thing to do with good advice is to pass it on. It's never of good use to oneself. So we'll keep that aside. The other comment is from another senior colleague in our faculty who called me to task, quite rightly, last year when I came, and the first thing I did was an event which related to the late 20th century. And he said, Guy, you're steering out of your period as an historian. And that's part of what history does. We safeguard our periods. Maybe less than Richard Carney, a philosopher, can go anywhere in time and space. We're very policed. So I will think about my time period today, or maybe not. Maybe I'm not steering out of my time period. Maybe it really is what Rowan said. Maybe it is the very, very long 19th century. I'll leave it for you to judge. Third comment. I very much regret that Maureen Sullivan, my patron, is not here today because it would have been great fun. She's a great person. She couldn't come today, but she'll see the recording, I hope, and we'll see her soon enough next term. Really, her support is incredible. It's given us a lot of support in Irish studies. It's changed my career and transformed things, and that's incredible. And a way of paying tribute sometimes is doing it by tongue-in-cheek. That's how we do it in Irish studies. So if you Google the Sullivan Chair, you might find my name, and you might get to Maureen that way. Or you might find that it's a piece of upholstery. There's a piece of furniture called a Sullivan Chair. That's the closest I could find to it. And so I will deliver my lecture accordingly from a Sullivan Chair. That was 3. Number 4 is my tribute to the genre, which I know very little about, of science fiction, so you're going to have to excuse me for a minute. I think this is what they call in the jargon cosplay. Let's see in a minute. But we'll go with this one.
Space, the final frontier. These are the voyages of the Starship Enterprise. Its continuing mission to explore strange new worlds, to seek out new life and new civilizations, to boldly go where no one has gone before.
So that was a taste of retro sci-fi, which I'm going to bring you back to. We're going to be going into the future by going into the past. And what we're looking at is Star Trek: The Next Generation, the series that was screened on American TV and around the world from 1987 to 1994 to huge acclaim, and was followed by many fans, by millions of people around the world. And it is a next generation. It is following in the footsteps of the original Star Trek, the original series. Some of us tend to be frivolous when we talk about science fiction, but those who are fans of the genre know that that was a revolutionary moment in American TV and in global TV. If we even look at the cast shown here, it was a show that displayed radical diversity. Take a look at the cast. For example, Nichelle Nichols, who passed away last summer, portrayed a powerful black female character in a prominent role. Afterwards, we learned about her correspondence with Martin Luther King, who encouraged her to perform, claiming that it was empowering for black people to see her in that role. Or George Takei, an Asian American actor, not shown in this picture here, who played Lieutenant Sulu, or the fact that there's somebody of mixed race, for whatever that means, in the character of Spock, with Leonard Nimoy playing both an alien and a human of mixed race. So something new and interesting was happening there. Yet this was within the confines of the period. Take a look at the famous prologue that opened each episode. It's all about where no man has gone before. Now, this was amended in the prologue we just heard, if you paid attention. In the second generation, it's where no one has gone before. Indeed, second generation took upon itself to bring even more diversity onto the screen. Take a look at the crew. We can see, first of all, much more prominent women characters in different roles. We also see a character with disability. That's the character of Geordie LaForge, played by Lever Burton Jr., who is visually impaired and is a valued member of the team. There's a variety of ages, spanning from the young to the old. There's a trainee who is a kid alongside older characters, different people of different races and different species. And we have an alien, a Klingon belonging to an enemy species, who has now joined the team and is part of the crew. And so we encounter a vision of peace in a future world. And the crew even goes beyond aliens and humans. There's an android, a transhuman. Data is a member of the crew. We are exposed to remarkable diversity. Now remember this, because we're going to go on board the Starship Enterprise. Now we've only seen it from the outside. We're going to look at it in its second generation phase. As people like Rowan who know the genre could tell you that the poster was misleading on purpose, we're looking at a second generation phrase. And we're looking at a very specific episode. It's an episode in season 2. It was broadcast in 1989, and it's called Up the Long Ladder. Let's hear the captain's log of what's exactly happening.
Captain's log, stardate 42823.2. We're departing from Starbase 73 to investigate the source of a mysterious distress signal.
So we're in the 24th century, and there's a mysterious distress signal. And when they investigate it, they realize it relates to a part of the galaxy known as the Ficus sector. Wouldn't read too much into that. And it's a planet known as Bringloid. And what's interesting about this distress signal, the program starts with this puzzle, is that it's an antiquated distress signal. That code hasn't been used in centuries. But luckily we have computers who can solve that for us. So they ask the computer. And the computer explains that it belonged to the European hegemony. Now I assume from the laugh that you all know what the European hegemony is, or was, or will be. But not necessarily. Some of you might be like number 1, Captain Riker, who says, what is the European hegemony? And for that, all I can do is answer in the exact same words of Captain Jean-Luc Picard. You should know your history a bit better. Because if you'd know your history of the future, you would know that the European hegemony is, or was, or will be, a loose alliance formed in the early 22nd century. According to the episode, it's the first stirrings of world government. I would rather imagine it as the development of the EU. In other ways, the European Union. But the plot goes in the following way, that people who were sent out as colonists in the 22nd century from Earth had run into problems, overpopulation, is sending out colonists, and they've been out in space for a couple of centuries. And now we're in the 24th century, and there's a distress signal. They find out that the planet that they populated is no longer sustainable, and they need to save them and rescue them. So they go to rescue them. And by rescuing them, they have to beam them on board. So let's go over to the engine room and watch the moment where they're beamed on board. Are we ready?
Captain, you better get somebody down here. Right away.
So as you've seen here, something is going on, right? In all its mission to explore strange new worlds, new civilizations, new life, we seem to have arrived at a very odd place. We seem to have arrived at the planet of the Irish stereotypes. Perhaps the strangest planet in the galaxy or in the known universe. And it's particularly interesting from this perspective, as we see what's happening. On the one hand, the doctor of the ship can tell us that these people were already antiquated when they left, right? They don't look like 22nd century. There's something happening here in terms of people being lost in time. And at the same time, this image, this perspective is interesting, because the person who's beating them up is, of course, an O'Brien. Told you there'd be an O'Brien, Jackie. Is an O'Brien. It's Transporter Chief Miles O'Brien, played by Colm Meaney, the great Dublin actor. So we have a 24th century Irishman beaming up these antiquated 22nd century Irishmen on the ship. And if we don't understand the pun, and as it's happening, it's made quite clear when the head Irishman, who's just standing over here, steps up to him, of course offers a drink, and says, "O'Brien, is it? I should have known 'twould be a good Irishman that was running this ship." So something is going on here. What I suggest we do is we go down and visit with the captain himself as he goes down to the docks of the ship to see these people as they're transported on the ship. By the way, one of the great things of doing research on this topic is not only do you get to read books and see lots of films, is you get to look through all the websites of all the fans. And there's a whole line of things. People write serious articles, but some of them have incredible humor. So one of the best I've seen is, so they transported the hay as well, did they? Yeah. They didn't just transport the people, they brought the hay with them. Just small details which are interesting. But let's go down to the hull of the boat, if we may, with Captain Picard, and let's play a little game. The clip is about 2 minutes long. Let's see how many Irish stereotypes can you spot in over 2 minutes. And for those who need a trigger warning, let's not take it too seriously. They're not taking themselves too seriously. You'll see that the characters themselves, both in character and out of character, are finding it very hard to keep a straight face. Let's see how it goes.
My God, Picard, the place is a bloody death trap. Lightning bolts falling from the ceiling. Yeah, what the hell was that thing?
Automated fire system. A force field contains the flame until the remaining oxygen has been consumed.
Yeah, what if I'd been under that thing?
You would have been standing in the fire.
Yeah, well, leaving that aside for the moment, I mean, what would have happened to me?
You would have suffocated and died.
Yeah, sweet mercy.
Oh, there you are. Your hospitality leaves a hell of a lot to be desired. You don't offer us a bite or a sup, and when we build a fire to cook a little something, the whole place goes mad.
My apologies. I was unaware that you had not been instructed in the use of the food dispensers.
And what are you staring at? You never seen a woman before?
I thought I had.
Commander, may I present my daughter, Brenna Odell?
Pleased to meet you, ma'am.
You may have all the time in the world, but I've dozens of frightened and hungry children and women to look after.
And what about the men?
Well, I'm sure they'll find their comfort, as they always do, in the bottom of a mug of homebrew.
Pay no heed, Commander. No, she's a fine girl. She's not usually as sharp-tongued as that.
Donald!
Sir? The last thing I expected.
Sometimes you just have to bow to the absurd.
So let's bow to the absurd. And tell me, what have you spotted? Let's play this game quickly. Which Irish stereotypes were spotted there? One by one. Lots of kids, pregnant women. Excellent. Man drinking, of course. Sharp-tongued woman. The feisty Irish woman. Excellent, Abby. That was exactly needed. Very good. The good-looking Irish woman. Very good. Good point there. Tess? Hospitality is an interesting one. Didn't think about that one. Interesting. Aha. Technological backwards. By the way, this comes together with the drinking in a later scene where they actually see these people, they set up a still there and begin mixing poachine, of course. That's one of the first things they'll be doing. So it's all the stereotypes are playing there. If you go around, you might have noticed some Irish music playing, of course. There's musicians playing. There's a spinning wheel, the animals, the notion of husbandry in the house, right? It's all going around in domestic quarters. A lot of things are going on there. The squeeze box, of course, classic. So we've got all of that. And as the captain said, sometimes we just have to bow to the absurd. So how ridiculous is this? I want to meditate and muse upon that together with you, perhaps, and take an exegesis. Let's put the episode aside and think for a minute about the framing, about the name of the episode. It's called Up the Long Ladder. Now that could be seen, and this, by the way, is a recurring theme I've discovered in Star Trek literature. That one of the key themes in science fiction, but particularly in Star Trek, is the notion of evolution. As people evolve over time, it's the ladder of evolution. So on the one hand, we have the Irishmen of the past, and we have the Irishmen of the future, and all of civilization is moving forward. That might be a theme. But remember, we got the clue. The clue is in history. And as an historian of the 18th century, I know the phrase, up the long ladder. Does it mean anything to anybody? Has anybody ever heard this phrase, up the long ladder, down the short rope? Very good, remarkable. That is very sharp. So, even before the Clancy brothers, it wasn't their song. It's an 18th century ditty, a rhyme, which refers to quite literally gallows humor. Up the long ladder and down the short rope is an execution. It's part of this kind of series of ballads and songs and a subculture of literally gallows humor. Last term, we had Professor James Kelly from Ireland as our Burns scholar who specializes in that kind of material. So you can follow where this material comes from. It's straight to the 18th century, perseveres in Irish folklore up until today, particularly in Northern Ireland and Ulster. And again, the example would be, and it's a great memory you have there, in 1963, let me show you one example. In 1963, in Carnegie Hall, the Clancy brothers with the Bard of Armagh, Tommy Makem, that's important here, they perform. And in between, this remarkable moment in the concert where they break into a medley of children's songs that they remembered from their youth. So let's hear Tommy Makem himself recite it.
And then in Armagh, where I was born and raised, thanks be to God, the first thing you're likely to hear when you're being rocked to sleep would be something like, up the long ladder and down the short rope to hell, King Billy, and God bless the Pope. If that didn't do, we'll tear him in two, but send him to hell, he's dead white and blue.
So, Sheila, you thought you wouldn't hear any music here. There's different parts of it there. There you go. Interestingly enough, different people in their memoirs from Northern Ireland, including the great poet laureate Seamus Heaney, recalls this poem from his youth and recalls that it was a riposte, a retort to a Protestant version. There's a loyalist version of the same one which changes it. In this version, it's God bless King Billy and to hell with the Pope. We're projected straight into the sectarian hatreds of Ireland and Northern Ireland. And so there's a strong Irish thing going on here in terms of history. I think there's also something else. And perhaps Professor Cale would recognize this one. But the word itself of the planet that they go to, these people, belong to planet Bringloid. And Bringloid, in Irish, is a vision, a dream. It's a bit like Spancel Hill, the ballad, isn't it? Kind of, how does it go there? I went upon a vision and I embarked upon a dream, and he went back to poor old Ireland. It's almost as if we're invited to go in a vision, to go with a vision from the Irish past into the Irish future. But of course, it's a fictional Irish future. It's not real Irishmen that we're seeing here, Irish women, is it? What we're really seeing here is Irish stereotypes, stage Irishmen. O'Donnell here is the consummate, if you wish, Paddy. And for those who are not aware of what stage Irishmen are, then there's a long history and a long tradition of Irishmen playing it up on the stage, on the English stage, but also on the Irish stage, which goes back to Elizabethan drama in the early modern period. The Renaissance flourishes in the 18th century and continues afterwards. In fact, let me give you the definition, for those who are not from Irish studies, of the stage Irishman from the Oxford Companion of Irish Literature. The stage Irishman was generally garrulous, boastful, unreliable, hard-drinking, belligerent, though cowardly, and chronically impecunious. His chief identifying marks were disorderly manners, insalubrious habits, together with the Hiberno-English dialect or brogue. He has the gift of the gab, if you want to be kind. He speaks Irish bull or baloney or blarney. That's the characters that we see on stage. And there's a long tradition of that, of great Irish dramatists, in fact, utilizing it to great effect in the 18th century. Think of such names, for example. Captain O'Blunder from Thomas Sheridan's Captain O'Blunder, the Brave Irishman. Sir Callahan O'Brallan, Charles Macklin, Lava la Mode. Sir Lucius O'Trigger, Richard Brinsley Sheridan, The Rivals. Thady O'Blarney, Walter Olton, Botheration. Jim, you should recognize some of these titles, even though we don't do enough 18th century, do we? I mean, this is classic. That's Professor Jim Smith, who's a professor of Irish literature, of course, in our program. And yet this came to its apex, to its height, I believe, in the 19th century, in the melodramatic tradition, which is epitomized by the great, if you respect it in its own terms, melodramatic playwright Dion Boucicault. So Dion Boucicault, in his plays like The Choron, The Colleen Bawn, or Arana Pogue, of course, Arana Pogue. It's these classic plays which were hugely popular in Ireland, in Britain, across the British Empire, in America. These are some of the original kind of productions of plays. Later, heavily criticized by the Gaelic revival, the Irish revival, for selling out, for showing stage Irishmen, and yet were remarkable works of popularity. We shouldn't dismiss them. In the same way, we might want not to dismiss that quickly, science fiction, as being cheap depictions. Something is going on here which is of interest. But this is not just happening on the stage. This, of course, also feeds into and draws from the encounters of Irish people as they experience hatred and discrimination throughout Irish history, but in particular through immigration. As they travel to England and travel to America, if we think of the stereotypes, of 19th century stereotypes, of a magazine like Harpers Weekly, which is the embodiment of what immigrants have always faced throughout time, the immigrants have changed, of xenophobia, of being seen as the other, as the strange, as bringing lawlessness, of bringing crime, of bringing bad, of bringing the wrong faith, of not fitting into society. So it's the images of Thomas Nast, a great caricaturist in his own artistic style, but look at what we have here of the Irishman who's a simian creature, right? It's the scale of evolution going back. He's going back in time. It's the planet of the apes in that sense. He's going back in time and he's drunk and he's about to set himself on fire and explode. Or the Irishman going drunk with a shillelagh and an imitation shillelagh and a dagger while ruining everything. And Uncle Sam has to turn to John Bull to deal with this troublesome person. Or in another version from Puck, this is all satirical magazines, but in this satire we discover something of the humor of the jokes that are being made. In this magazine here, which is about assimilation, it's about the melting pot, the model which was the model of 19th century and early 20th century America. So all the ethnic groups and races can mix in this melting pot, at least in the ideal, except the one here who comes out and is unmixable. He'll always remain problematic. He's fixed in time. He can't change. He's always quarrelsome. So it's, of course, building on that when we talk about the Paddies. And it's not just Paddies. There's, of course, a female equivalent. There's the Biddies. And the Biddies would be stereotypes which build on the notion of Irish women working domestic service, which is what many Irish women would have worked in, right? But this notion of the Irish Declaration of Independence, you leave them in the kitchen, the next thing you know, they'll be bossing you around and shouting and doing things around you. They'll be running the place. Reflected in a different way in the episode of Star Trek that we've seen, and continues and can be adopted and co-opted in different forms. Think, for example, of The Quiet Man. Of course, Maureen O'Hara, you couldn't find a more respectable figure, and yet Maureen O'Hara plays on that stereotype, and she knows she plays on that stereotype. She says quite clearly in Tis herself, her memoir, she says, an Irish woman is strong and feisty. She has guts and stands up for what she believes in. And it's playing up on this stereotype and converting it and using it. Now this might seem all very obvious to us. We can see these stereotypes from a mile away. This is kitsch. But this is interesting. When I took science fiction seriously as a scholar and began reading, there's a lot of critical literature written on science fiction, of course, and particularly on Star Trek. Books and books. I've been taking out from the library, every book in the library here. I've been taken into library alone, I've been reading the books, and there's a particular theme which is exactly ethnicity and race in Star Trek. It's a key theme. So we've got here racial and ethnic images in Star Trek, or racing towards a white future, or race in space, the representation of ethnicity in Star Trek and Star Trek The Next Generation. So critics have looked at this, And they've looked at every or any representation of race and ethnicity that they thought they identified there. But what's interesting is none of this literature comments at all on Irishness. And it makes you wonder. It takes that cliche title, which is an interesting one, I think it was 1996, of the book, which was an interesting kind of title of Noel Ignatieff, who wrote the book How the Irish Became White. How they moved from a position where they came over with a sense of being treated as, or to be treated as black, and competed with people who are coming at the same time. They came from the famine, competed with the people who are coming from emancipation and slavery to the same cities. There could have been a solidarity between them, but how people used this notion to change, say we can become white. We're going to, instead of building a solidarity of the repressed, of the undertrodden, let's join and move up the ladder. So it's an interesting moment. And what we see here, in a sense, is the result of that, is how the Irish not only became white, became transparent as an ethnic identity. So the jokes are there. It's clear in every way. It's clear that the jokes are there, and yet it's not marked as such as a critical category. And that's interesting. And with that in mind, let's return to the spaceship Enterprise and move piece of big Ella, a little bit. Let's move a little bit forward and see how the episode develops. And the episode develops as our man, the stage Irishman, turns to the captain, Danilo O'Dell, and says, "Have you heard anything of the other colony?" The other colony? And this is the interesting moment. This is where the plot twist happens. It turns out that in the 22nd century, there were 2 colonies sent out. One was this colony, and there's another one lost in space. And sure enough, soon we get messages from the other colony, and they're also in distress, and they need to be saved. So they make contact with them. And it's a very different colony. The colony there, which they meet there, is highly technological, very rational, very scientific, very organized. They have a cabinet, they have ministers, they have secretaries, they have advisors, they have a prime minister. His name is Walter Granger. In fact, they have many Grangers on the planet. A more respectable name than Walter Granger. But they have many Grangers on the planet because it turns out that they are clones. You see, because this highly rational and highly scientific and highly bureaucratic and highly advanced technology had forgotten something over time. It turns that over the course of time, they had forgotten how to have sex. They had forgotten how to reproduce. They had become asexual. Now, if you don't get it till now, I think it's quite obvious. What we found here is another queer oddity in the back corners of the galaxy. It's the planet of the stage Englishman. We met the stage Irishman, we met the stage Englishman, and the two go hand in hand. Much more has been written about the stage Irishman, but as Liz Cullingford, a brilliant scholar, noticed years ago, from the beginning, there is no stage Irishman without a stage Englishman. It's not for nothing, I think, that their planet is called Mariposa, Spanish, the butterfly, the 2 wings. The two are dependent on each other. It's like the great Australian Irish scholar, historian, Oliver MacDonough wrote years ago about Ireland and England as being the Siamese twins, locked in a conflict all the time. The two feed on each other. And the problem with the clones is they've reached the end of their ability to reproduce. They can't keep reproducing themselves. They need fresh DNA. In other words, they need breeding stock. So you can see where I'm going here, or where the starship is going to. The Bringloidia, their ideal solution. You bring the two together. It seems a perfect solution. It's not easy. The captain or the prime minister looks at them, they're primitive, they're hostile, they're disruptive, he can't quite stomach them. The Irishmen have a good problem with him as well and his condescension. But in the end, they find a solution. They hold negotiations, they send in the clones, and they form a union. Now, for historians in the room, this is all too familiar, of course. What we've seen here reenacted in space in the 24th century is a reenactment in sorts of the Act of Union of 1800, 1801. As it was depicted already in the time, in this notion of the masculine, the empowered Englishman, John Bull, marrying the less fortunate Hibernia, but bringing her in and civilizing her with his wealth and his endowment. This would be a more civilized caricature. This would be a more vulgar form. And it's also reflected, of course, as we often see in Irish studies, because Irish studies crosses disciplines. Definitely history and literature and politics and sociology, and moves from discipline to discipline. This was, of course, reflected in the literature of the time. The notion of the national tale emerges then, most famously in the writing of Sidney Owenson, Lady Leta Morgan, The Wild Irish Girl, which is exactly a tale of an Englishman who's civilized and rational and wants commercial development and arrives in Ireland to the very west coast and finds a noble savage woman who's feisty and plays on the other stereotypes, and they marry together in a marriage which symbolizes the act of union. So we've seen this before. We should go beyond that. I think there's an ideology which leads us into the 19th century, which is perhaps best expressed by Matthew Arnold. Matthew Arnold was the professor of poetry in the University of Oxford in the mid-19th century. And Matthew Arnold, I believe, is being now projected into space. Because Matthew Arnold famously wrote the study of Celtic literature. He was impressed by the great Breton scholar Ernest Renan, who wrote an appreciation of Celtic poetry, and he did a study of Celtic literature. And for Matthew Arnold, he found remarkable things in Celtic literature. He says the Celtic people, which for him signified the Welsh, the Scottish, the Irish, have something in them which is sentimental. It's this sentimental nature. It's romantic and it's attractive. Very feminine, isn't it, right? This gender notion here. But they're undiscernible, they're anarchical, they're turbulent. They can't govern themselves. They're good when you add a bit of crack. They're good for poetry, they're good for the soul. The Anglo-Saxon, on the other hand, this is heavily racialized, is something else. They're very disciplinable, they're steadily obedient. They know how to govern a country, and other countries as well. They know how to run an empire. They know how to run a tight ship. And of course, the answer is screaming out there, because it's the 19th century. What we need to is commingle. We bring the two races, and these are racist terms at the time, we bring them together, and we get this ideal breeding. We bring over the Englishman who knows how to govern and he's rational in technology and advancement and the future and the progress, but he lacks a bit of soul. You bring in the Irishman for the soul, the Celts for the soul, and you have this perfect union. There's, of course, politics come in the prob way here. This is all about culture, but politics are a problem. And Matthew Arnold addressed that 2 years later. Note the date this comes out, 1867. We'll return to that in a minute. 1869, he writes Culture and Anarchy, which is essentially a political manifesto of these ideas. It's this great dissonance between the Celts and the Anglo-Saxons and what's happening here with the Irish problem in the background, with the Fenians in the background, the Fenian Rebellion of 1867. And he even addresses specifically in a passage in the book, the Fenians. The Fenians are beyond the pale. They're too wild. They're too extreme. They're terrorists in today's language, and even the language will be adopted shortly also in the period itself. They're even worse than the rabble and the masses in England who can be educated and can be moved forward. They're too extreme. So some people will not change. They can't fit into the mix, like with immigration before. These are the hard element of the Irish stereotypes. And that, of course, is part of the political discourse of the 19th century. Let's see it again in its satire in Punch magazine. It's the Simeonized Irishman, the Paddy, the Fenian, who represents the forces of anarchy. He's doing what would be called in the Middle East an intifada, throwing stones against the forces of empire, holding his sword, holding her sword, Britannia, empire and law. It's this battle of forces. But it's the 19th century. The Irishman can speak back. So we can see different depictions in the 19th century. On the one hand, nationalist iconography, Republican iconography. So it's Erin being sent into a cell, being imprisoned, fighting for freedom, revolution, independence, freedom fighters. Or the other side, violent rebels, revolutionaries, terrorists, the depictions of Fenians as what we would call today a suicide terrorist. They're animals, they're inhuman, they're willing to kill women and children sitting on a barrel, and of course, a barrel of gunpowder, and of course these animals, that's who the people are who commit terrorists, who commit acts of terror. And this feeds into all the stereotypes we heard before of immigration, of course, right? You've got to fear these kind of people who can arrive. Who are they? And they're strange and inhuman. I'm not sure we've left the 19th century quite yet. We think of the stereotypes that are there. So let's go back on the Starship Enterprise. I think we've finished with this episode. Let's embark on another one. Science fiction double feature. Let's take another show, 2 for the price of 1. We'll continue with the Starship Enterprise, and we'll visit another episode. This episode is called The High Ground. It screened the following year in 1990. If you want the star date, for those who really need to know, when an equivalent of 2386, it's the following year, quite literally. And the planet we're going to visit this time is called Rutia. The Starship has been called there to bring humanitarian aid. Very innocuous. They bring humanitarian aid to the government of Rutia. And they come down with a delegation of people who are bringing medical aid. And when they come down there, they experience a terrorist attack. The Rutians, you see, are ruling over another culture called the Ansanta. And the Ansanta are the terrorists. So lo and behold, we found another strange thing in the corners of the galaxy. We have come to the planet of the terrorists. Now, the planet of the terrorists is an interesting one. The room got very somber when I said that. But let's remember, this is pre-9/11. This is the discourse of terrorism before 9/11. This is the discourse of the 70s, the 80s, and the 90s of terrorism, which is a very vibrant debate. Much of it appears here. The doctor, Beverly Crusher, who we see here, will be hijacked, will be kidnapped, and will be held hostage, and will go through an equivalent of Stockholm syndrome. We'll start not quite identifying, but hearing and trying to see that the lines are more blurred, that the lines of morality are not quite clear. We'll hear different sides. The whole episode will engage with the notion of, these are the two sides here, the whole episode will engage with the notion of what's the logic behind here? Is there any rationale? Are these crazy people or not? In the context of a program broadcast in 1990. But we get to hear not only get to see depictions of terrorism, we get to hear the terrorists speak back. Can the terrorist speak? Well, apparently he can. He's very eloquent. And he's holding hostage Beverly Crusher, so we hear the doctor's dialogues. And at some stage, he introduces himself. Did I mention my name is Finn? Now, he is not an Irish stereotype. There's no Irish accent there. But he's Finn, which is interesting in itself. And not only that, when he's not committing acts of terrorism or advocating for terrorism, you can catch him with a sketch pad. He's taking little drawings. He's a bit of an artist. And the doctor is impressed and said, you should be drawing, not killing people. Of course, he has an answer. He can do both. So we're back with Matthew Arnold and his Fenians, who are sentimental and prone to violence. And again, I would argue that the key to understanding this, and this is where I come in, is again history. The whole dialogue here is a dialogue of history. History has shown us that strength may be useless when faced with terrorism. So this whole debate of can terrorism work or not, is it legitimate? As people are facing it in the Middle East, as people are facing it in Europe, as people are facing it in Northern Ireland, as we'll see. And there's a history to that, because Finn, let's remind you, comes from Finn McCool, from the Irish mythology, right, the Fenian scale, but it's also the name that was adopted in the 19th century by the Fenians, by the Irish Republican Brotherhood. Before there was an IRA, there was an IRB. And the Fenians, the Irish-American Fenians, embarked on a terror campaign in the 1880s. Between 1881 to 1885, more or less, Irish Americans from Clan na Gael or the skirmishes of Jeremiah O'Donovan Rossa came over to mainland Britain, to Scotland and to England, and committed a series of terrorist attacks where the point was, you think you've defeated us in the battlefield, you think you've defeated us in rebellion, but the Irish problem will not go away. And it's a series of terrorist attacks which were spectacular. And I use the word spectacular not as in its positive sense, but the fact that terrorism has to be spectacular. It has to be something dramatic which we can't keep our eyes off. As we see a plane hit into the Twin Towers, we can't keep our eyes off it even if it's horrific. So also here they knew how to capture imagination. A whole series of events continues for a few years, but if you want to hear the highlight, Dynamite Sunday, 24th of Jan, 1885, a bombing goes off in London Bridge, in the Tower of London, and in Westminster, the Parliament. You can't keep your eyes off this. It's happening all around. England and Britain is swept by Fenian fever, the fear that any Irishman might be a terrorist, any immigrant that comes over. It feeds into the stereotypes. It strengthens the stereotypes. And again, every immigrant from that moment is seen as suspect. Everybody is problematic, not the small group who are doing it. It's also interesting, as I bring us slowly back to science fiction, the engagement of the Fenians with technology. First of all, they're using dynamite. It's the latest technology. Alfred Nobel just invented dynamite a few years earlier. Before that, they used gunpowder, far less reliable. But not only that, there's the curious story of John Holland. I don't know if people know the story of John Philip Holland. I'll keep it very short. County Clare school teacher, engineer, travels over to America, to New York, and decides that he's going to develop a submarine as a form of naval warfare so that Britannia won't rule the waves. Britannia has this huge advantage of being a naval empire. So he develops his prototype, Holland 1, over here, which seems a very crude model. It's a man sitting in a boat, literally paddling underwater. Doesn't quite work for some reason. Keeps working on it till he develops a full-on military submarine, which can work with pneumatic missiles, which can ram into boats. In fact, the press call it the Fenian ram. And then it, of course, runs into the traps that will happen with every Irish secret organization. There'll be squabbling and there'll be splits. And there'll be sub-splits within the group. And he's not paid for his work. So he doesn't deliver the submarine. And Clan na Gael steal the submarine, but they don't have the instructions. They don't know what to do with it. If you want to see where it is, it's sitting outside New Jersey somewhere. And it's still around there now because the Fenian ram is lost in history, even though Holland will later develop submarines for the US Navy, which will later be used by the British Navy, ironically. So that's the story of submarine warfare. And I tell you the story because once again, as we know in Irish studies, there's always a reflection in literature, in culture, this kind of history. So I'm thinking of a book which fascinated me years ago, James Greer's A Modern Daedalus. It's a science fiction novel written in 1885, in which instead of taking naval warfare for terrorism, it's set in the air. A scientist, a school teacher as well, develops wings to fly. And the Fenians want it, but he doesn't want to give it to the Fenians. But then they steal it and they don't know what to do with it. But in this case, he joins the cause. And they fly over to England, they do a series of terrorist attacks from the air. And they get Irish independence. Who would believe that? And that's part of a series of a genre at the time that comes out in the 1880s and 1890s, of future fiction. Books like, and there's loads of them, books like The Battle of the Moy, How Ireland Gains Her Independence from 1883, or The Red Leaguers by Shan Bullock, 1904. So it's part of a genre. And there always is in Ireland, a riposte to that. There's another set of forms, which is a unionist literature of future wars. What will happen if Ireland does get home rule, if Ireland does get independence? Because the background to this fiction, of course, is the Home Rule Bill of 1885, the Home Rule Bill of 1893, the prospect that Ireland might get independence and what will happen afterwards. So in Unionists, this is terrible. The future will be a complete destruction of Ireland. This is postcards from the National Library of Ireland of imagining this future Irish state. And it's reflected in fiction as well, in books like The Reconquest of Ireland in 1895. So they'll get independence, we'll have to reconquer them. There'll be a civil war, and from Ulster, of course, and Ulster will reconquer Ireland. Written in 1881, so it's projecting 1895. Or, this is my personal favorite, there's many, I've read quite a few titles, but as somebody who studied the 1798 rebellion, this is the Irish Rebellion of 1898, a chapter in future history, written in 1893. Now, Jack Fennell, who's the expert on Irish science fiction, has commented that this isn't, it's future fiction. It's not quite science fiction, most of these books. Unlike the modern Daedalus, which uses technology, most of these books don't use technology. It's the weapons of today being used in a few years in the future. And that is a common genre in European literature in the period between the Franco-Prussian War and the First World War. There's a historian called Clark who's written about this, who's written a lot about future fiction, how people predict a great war which is going to break out. This is its Irish exponent. In other cases, it's predicting World War I. But it also has reflections in early science fiction, like H.G. Wells' The War of the Worlds. It could be aliens coming down. They're imagining a future world. So Ireland doesn't quite engage in that. I would say the image, as I bring us back to our episode, is less this kind of history, but of course something quite more current. It's the Troubles. It's the imagery of the explosions that are going off in Northern Ireland. That's what's playing around in the high ground, in the background. Not the Fenians, but contemporary terrorism. And as if to spell it out, the captain and his number one will go and speak with the officer in charge of security on this planet, who is, of course, a strong woman, if you wish, an Iron Lady, a younger version of an Iron Lady. And as she says here, these are not people we're dealing with here. They're animals. Fanatics who kill without remorse or conscience. So that's the depiction. There's no way of dealing with these terrorists. There's something else. It's all the stereotypes that we had before transplanted on these animals. But then the captain asks, how many are there? Well, she admits they're a small minority, but there's a wider sympathy in the public. And that's how they engage with the wider notion of what's going on. Citizens will always be sympathetic to the cause. How will they be sympathetic? Well, they might supply weaponry, hide weaponry, they might supply information, they might go to demonstrations, they might go on general strikes, they might do the occasional riot. In short, I can see Tiffany smiling there, we're back in Northern Ireland, aren't we? We're right back in Northern Ireland with the rhetoric that's going on. And if those are not clear, because it seems that we're in the 24th century, but for those who are not clear what the history and the chronology is, then it's spelled out for us. How did this ever start? Well, 1990, right? 17 years ago, we denied them independence. That gave them a noble cause. Now it's just an excuse for more violence. So who's using a cause and how is it being used? And is it being used as a rhetoric to justify violence? And the whole time we're going back and hearing the terrorists talk back. Terrorists who are quite aware that they're looking for martyrs. They're willing to become martyrs. They know the value of martyrs in a struggle of terrorism. Terrorists who will go beyond that and say that they're willing to die for their freedom. They're willing to sacrifice themselves. But more callously, they're willing to kill for their freedom. So that discourse is going in the background, and the whole episode is about, is this rational or not? Are these irrational people? Does this make any sense? And the person who's struggling with this most, oddly enough, is not the humans, but it's the computer, is the embodiment of rational, is the android. And this is the moment where the android breaks out. Let's follow this dialogue.
Sir.
Listen carefully.
I'm finding it difficult to understand many aspects of Ansata conduct. Much of their behavioral norm would be defined by my program as unnecessary and unacceptable.
By my program as well, Data.
But if that is so, Captain, why are their methods so often successful? I've been reviewing the history of armed rebellion, and it appears that terrorism is an effective way to promote political change.
Yes, it can be. But I have never subscribed to the theory that political power flows from the barrel of a gun.
Yet there are numerous examples when it was successful. The independence of the Mexican state from Spain, the Irish unification of 2024, and the Kenzie Rebellion.
Yes, I'm aware of them.
Then would it be accurate to say that terrorism is acceptable when all options for peaceful settlement have been foreclosed?
Data, these are questions that mankind has been struggling with throughout history. Your confusion is only human.
And there you have it with that quandary there. And of course, that remarkable scene, that giveaway line, the Irish unification of 2024. I want to talk a little bit about the history of that comment for a few minutes. I'm drawing towards my end here, but we might want to think about this because of that one line, this program was effectively banned both in Ireland and in the United Kingdom. And here, to understand that culture, you have to read the latest book of my colleague, Rob Savage. And you'll understand about censorship in the BBC during the Troubles, during Thatcher's time. We're talking about an Iron Lady. So it was banned. It couldn't be played. When it was played not on terrestrial TV, but on cable TV, on Sky One. But even then, they had to cut out that scene. The first time that it's shown in Great Britain was in 2007. It's shown in 2007, and even then, they waited till after midnight for the rerun. It still seemed as explosive after the Good Friday Agreement, after the Troubles are supposedly behind. It's still seen as problematic. The first time it's shown in Northern Ireland is also interesting. It was also 2007. It was in a cultural festival in Belfast. And quite literally, the director had to apologize. It was controversial for showing this episode, saying, we're not showing it in a partisan way, and we certainly don't believe it to be seen as any kind of propaganda. We're showing it because of the issues it raises in relation to censorship. So it's not the issue is censorship. So this episode is more ambivalent, if you wish, less clear. It ends on a denuendo. The terrorist in the end is overcome, but is also shot and killed. It's an imperfect solution for an imperfect world. It suits the notion of terrorism. They try to add a bit of optimism in there, and there's a child who wants to follow in his path and picks up a weapon, but he drops his weapon. So maybe the end begins with one boy putting down his gun. Now that might seem optimistic, but it's a very cautious, low-key optimism because it's 1990. It's before the ceasefires. The Good Friday Agreement is not even on the horizon. For those of the younger generation who are trying to contextualize this is the end of Derry Girls Season 1. There's an attack going on, and you have to learn how to dance, despite the attack. So what happened since then? Let's kind of wind this up and bring it together. Star Trek, of course, has bourgeoised into many series and many films and many adaptations. A whole universe in itself. Rowan will have to tell me if I'm using the word because I'm probably using it wrong. Maybe a multiverse, maybe not, because it's not parallel times. But things have moved since then. Perhaps history has caught up with science fiction. I mean, after all, William Shatner has traveled in space at the age of 90. So Captain Kirk is in space. We've witnessed that a year ago. More than that, there's a monument in Iowa for Captain Kirk's birth. The town claimed that he's going to be born there in 200 years. And we even witnessed a month ago how Kate Mulgrew, the actress who plays Catherine Genoway, a captain in a future series in Voyager, also has a monument in Bloomington, Indiana. So she's going to visit the place where she's going to be born in 2 centuries. So these are the paradoxes as we move closer to the dates. What's going to happen in 2024 when we're in 2022? Well, Captain O'Brien, let's return to him, to Chief O'Brien, Colomini. Colomini was just a month ago in Dublin speaking at Ireland's Future Conference, which is a conference in which 5,000 people gathered to discuss the possibility of what would happen that would bring a united Ireland. The context, however, has changed. This is not about a united Ireland brought through violence. It's through discussion. It's through debate. The Taoiseach appeared and spoke there. The head of Sinn Féin, Mary Lou O'Donnell spoke there. Not only MacDonald, but also actors and cultural people spoke there. James Nesbitt, the actor, spoke there. So we've got a whole variety of speakers engaging in a discussion about a future unified Ireland or not, and what it would mean. So it's interesting, this kind of moment where we can't project what will happen in the future. We can have debates in the present of what we expect of a future. And with that, I'd like to deliver some final comments, because I'm going to leave this inconclusive, as it should be, I think, on a talk of such subject matter. But perhaps let's recall as an image for my last slide, Sean Hillen's imagery, which was quite well known some 20 years ago from the Irelantis series. It's a series of kind of montages which are cut and paste and presented. This is his one, The Launch Pad at O'Connell Street. In a way, it's a mockery of Irish science fiction, isn't it? It's the old joke that if the Irish would send a rocket into space, it would be propelled by turf. You know, it'll be a Paddy rocket in a way. It's kind of playing with this, the launch pad in O'Connell Street. But these images were celebrated everywhere around the turn of the millennium. It was seen to be this kind of comment, a postmodern pastiche, how clever it is with these images and how it plays. But it took a great cultural critic like Fintan O'Toole to look at it some years later and say, we misread it completely. Behind all these funny images, these very clever images, there was a pessimism involved. There was a warning involved, staring us right in the face. The fear that maybe after the Celtic Tiger, which was just beginning to emerge then, there'll be a bust. After the boom, there'll be a bust. There'll be a recession. There'll be problems. There'll be difficulties. There'll be disillusion. It's just as much about utopia as about dystopia, which are, of course, 2 poles within science fiction. So what can we do in Irish studies with science fiction? Well, Irish studies in the 24th century is not me predicting how Irish studies will look in the 24th century. That would be ridiculous. I'm not even sure there'll be a world in the 24th century, to be honest. But we can think about this notion of taking not Irish in general, science fiction seriously. It seems like a frivolous genre. It seems like one which we take often less seriously in some of our courses, maybe not so in the literature department, but in other cases it might be. But as an historian, I find it quite interesting and surprising that I didn't engage with it properly before, because I read these future texts before and found them curious but didn't do anything with them. Because what science fiction does do, it encapsulates in a remarkable, compressed way the expectations and anxieties we have in a present, which is always changing, for the future. And as an historian, I see how much this feeds upon the legacies of the past, how we bring in past traditions in the way we project and understand our expectations of the future. And that, I believe, is a topic worthy of an interdisciplinary field like Irish studies. Thank you very much.
So we were asking for a question there, Rowan, a Guy Beiner question. So who does have that first and second question for Captain Jean-Luc Guy Picard O'Sullivan Beiner? There we are. There we are. Richard Carney. Now, let me just take a look. Courtney, I can't remember because I was welcoming people downstairs when they were finishing the audio. Oh, there it is. I do have my second mic. Thank you, Rachel. I was hoping, I just didn't see where it had been left. So, there we are. I'll step out of the way.
Thank you.
Guy, thank you for a really wonderful, wonderful lecture. My question is around that juxtaposition of images you showed in the Punch cartoon, sort of 19th century, images of Ireland and England. And I was very struck that Britannia is a woman, and Hibernia is a woman. Mm-hmm. So the good figures are feminine, and the bad guys, if you will, are masculine. Why does this happen in this reciprocal twinship relationship between Britain and Ireland at a time when in both countries women did not have a vote, were impoverished, were oppressed, and yet they're the good people? What's going on?
It takes a great philosopher like Richard Carney to ask a question like that. It cuts to the very core of romantic nationalism in the 19th century. Romantic nationalism idealized the role of the nation as a woman. This happens across European nationalism and beyond Europe. I don't need to tell you, Richard, it's Marianne. Right, that's the prototype, Marianne of France. You would know more than anybody else, but it has all its equivalents. There's Germania in Germany. It's the woman as this classic, always this classic model of a woman from kind of classical Greece, put on a pedestal, holding a sword, representing the nation, in a nation which is completely masculine in terms of its politics, where women have no vote, have no part in the body politic, where suffragettes are jailed and force-fed, right? Oh, there's no space for them. It's this idealization. And that is part of the dynamic of cultural nationalism, romantic nationalism, is nationalism is the soul of the nation. It's seen as had to have feminine qualities, the best of it. It's again Matthew Arnold. It has the poetry, it has the songs, it has the dance, it has the language, it has the literature. It has all of that. The governance itself, the men have to put together. That's the practicalities. And that's the point there that you see both Britannia and Hibernia get along fine together. It's these monkey men. They're not quite men. There's something else. They really are the planet of something else going on there, who are descended in evolution. It's Darwin turned the wrong way around. They've gone to be apes because they always were apes. They're not real humans. And that's the racist depiction of the Irish. They don't fit into that. They have to be taken out of the picture to cultivate the real Hibernia. And that's, by the way, all over Europe. It's not an Irish thing. In every country, you'll see the minority. It could be the Jew in Europe as seen as the Irish person. There'll be different depictions in different places. Please.
Thanks very much for your talk. My question has to do, so you've chosen a science fiction series that's an American series, right? And it's always struck me that both Ireland and America, identity is deeply associated with the West, right? So it's true in Ireland, it's true in America, but in America, going to the West is going to the future. And this is an American science fiction show, which is incredibly optimistic. I mean, it's the defining genre of Star Trek is this optimism for the future where money doesn't exist, racism doesn't exist, all these other sorts of things. And I just wonder what thoughts you might have about the way Ireland is depicted, or Irish identity is depicted in this American science fiction series, because Americans go to the West to find themselves, but going to the West, as Thoreau and Emerson and all these figures say, is going to the future, where in Ireland it's reconnecting with the past.
Well, I think it's a bit of both. Remember, it's the notion of the final frontier, right? It's the frontier thesis. You go to the West, on the one hand, it's a possible future, but it also is the past. It's virgin terrain. That's how it's seen. That's the big myth, right? It's the myth of the land where civilization has come here. You're going to civilize it. By the way, it doesn't have to be a geographical West, right? Coming from my part of the world, it can be Zionists coming to Palestine, believing that they come to a land without people. But it's the notion of coming to terra incognita. You go to the land of the noble savages, and there you find the best of them, but you bring them modernity. And the same way of going in space, you've colonized all of the planet, now you have to look at the final frontier, space, which is supposed to be infinite, so there'll be a lot of infinite frontiers. Now, the interesting thing about this imagery is, of course, it's quite interesting. You say, how does this collide with Irish images? So Ireland has its own images of the West. The West is often seen in Ireland in depictions of being the areas that suffered the most, the areas that suffered most from the famine, the area that Cromwell sends people to Connacht, to hell, right? So there's a whole imagery of the West, and at the same time, and this will be picked up very clearly in the after Irish independence, the West is also seen again as this kind of natural place, a primitive place. Ireland as it's kept all the time. You can go to the southwest or the northwest. Sean's been to Donegal in the summer, they play on it. Galway will play on it as well. Kerry will play on it. It's this image that you go to the west and it's still Ireland as it used to be. So it's locked in the past, but it's also where we want to go. Very cleverly played on this episode in the line which I didn't give you, where they say, they have to explain, they have to find a reason why these Irishmen are locked in time, where they don't move in the time. They're locked. They don't seem to move these stereotypes. The image they give there, they say, well, in the 22nd century, there was a movement of going back to nature. That's who they're supposed to represent. So it's supposed to represent this kind of nativism in a sense, or not quite nativism, but this kind of moment of primitiveness. And all this is playing together. In this depiction of science fiction, it's mainly there for a laugh. Irish are supposed to, nobody's quite written yet, but the notion of Celts, not only, it's also Scots, Scotty in the original Star Trek and others. What do Celts represent here? Even in the notion of Chief O'Brien, so he's a modern 24th century Irishman, but he's also very proud that he's an O'Brien, which means he comes from the lineage of Brian Boru. And so he can go and practice in simulations and go back to the Battle of Clontarf. So this notion of the past and the future are playing together in different ways, and that's an interesting dynamic. I can go more on that, but we'll stop there. Mike?
Thank you, Guy. That was a very interesting and great talk. I'm curious if any of the science fiction novels that you read, and the Irish ones in particular, dealt with the theme of colonialism, just discussed in the question previous, given that colonialism seems to be both a major theme of science fiction and Irish history.
Of going what?
Colonialism.
Colonialism. Well, of course it engages with it. Now, I have to say quite clearly, what I showed you today was not Irish science fiction, right? What we showed you is depictions of Ireland. Irish science fiction is a whole world in itself, and it engages in different forms. Colonialism is a major topic. Here, interestingly enough, it plays vis-a-vis the Irish, but not the Irish. It's a major topic. Empire and anti-imperialism and colonialism is a major topic, for example, in Star Trek. It's a minor topic, but it appears already in 19th century future fiction in Ireland, appears because it's part of nationalist Republican rhetoric, anti-imperialism. So that's the way it'll appear in. But of course, colonialism is a major theme in science fiction. And here I'm going to stop for a simple reason, that I'm not an expert on science fiction. And we have to look deeper in that. This is my encounter with it, trying to understand it. And I think it exactly engages with themes. And we can see how also major themes move. If anti-imperialism and colonialism is a major topic of science fiction for many years, now I seem to see a shift, and I'd have to adhere to people who understand the genre better, like Rowan, a shift more to engage with environmental issues, for example. Sometimes they come together, as in the remake of Dune, for example. So we'll see how these topics come together. Dune, beginning a long time ago, written a long time ago, but now engaging with these issues, but being updated to current debates. So of course, these are the issues that we reflect are being projected into the future. Conaveri.
Thank you so much. Really interesting, and I'm not only saying that because I spent every afternoon of my elementary school glued to the TV watching Star Trek. I'm wondering what kind of stories you're seeing about different sciences in this science fiction.
It's very good.
So the reason I'm asking that is that there's a narrative in that genre of that show of Star Trek, but also in the episodes you showed, in which biomedicine is emancipatory, right? People can heal without pain and really swiftly and no messy surgeries. And physics is emancipatory. You can sail, get starships. Is there an argument that sort of evolution, evolutionary biology is what's grabbing people back, right? We never see mining in Star Trek. Are there different sciences that are grabbing at the different groups here differently?
I'll be honest, I can't answer that because I think you can answer that, meaning you as an historian of science would need to revisit the episodes of you. I didn't watch Star Trek as a kid, so it's all new for me. But you'd have to revisit and ask the questions you exactly as an historian preoccupied by science to tease that out. I will comment and say that the interesting thing, and this again I adhere to the experts who do know Irish science fiction, and that would be Jack Fennell in Ireland specifically, who points out that all this early Irish science fiction didn't engage with science. When it comes to Ireland, the Irish are seen, and even in this episode here, the Irish are the non-scientific. The Irish are the essentialists. It's the primitive savages again. It's people who do things over there. And I think it's even funny, and when I was kind of looking at a lot of material on science fiction, its depictions, and kind of preparing this talk, I landed on this interview with Colm Meaney. Now, Colm Meaney is a revered figure in Ireland, a great actor, played many, many roles. But he's interviewed by a comedian, by Tommy Tiernan. And Tommy Tiernan asked him, didn't you ever feel ridiculous in Star Trek? Colm Meaney is looking, the audience is silent. How can you say this to Colm Meaney? And he has to explain this. He says, well, speaking all this techno-babble, right? This is nonsense. This is gibberish. And that's how it's perceived. So it's not engaging with science. This is just the babble, the nonsense that goes on there. You played a serious dramatic role, but they put this through the science on you, which is nonsense. So that isn't treated seriously, at least in some of the classic Irish science fiction, where it is treated in other cases. So it's interesting that the Irish are taken out of that. And I find it interesting, this comment, that made me think about the 19th century Irish science fiction, or future fiction, which engaged very little with technology. And that's missing. And that relates to a wider gap within Irish studies. The study of technology is not seen as a major theme in Irish studies. The study of nature and natural depictions is obvious. But where does the technology come in here? Where does the trains and train tracks change and modernize Ireland completely? That's a topic which has to be thought out more precisely. There was a question over there, please.
I was piqued when you spoke to and brought a focus to colonialism. And in the case of Northern Ireland, those 6 counties, so forth, they're cast as a colony. And they were deliberately designed so that the British cadre there, which was enormous, would always be able to set the rules. So they elected their own, they wrote their own rules, and they secured for themselves a safe haven for the British in Northern Ireland. And then demography has come along, and the demography of the Catholics and the Protestants are shifting. And the need is, if you're going to go ahead with the Good Friday Agreement, which draws in all the concepts of human rights, which would roll over non-rights in a colony, particularly if you were in the side to be discriminated against. There has to be a period of reconciliation where the people who had a colony type, a secure colony type, now have to think in terms of how can they get the same comfort and rights without a colony. And in the course of that discussion, the beauty of the Good Friday Agreement is that it says at the outset, anyone who wants to be British has an ultimate right to be British. And if you want to be Irish, rather than saying Catholic, you want to be Irish, you've got an ultimate right to be Irish. And there's a balance there so that no side would be discriminating against another. But it's going to take a good while for the British in Northern Ireland to feel that this period of reconciliation is going to come out with a fair, comfortable result.
So
but when you talked about colonialism, you saw it as something you could work on separately, definitely, but it will take a good while.
Thank you for the comment. And what I will say, rather than answering that directly, I will just say that these are issues which, of course, people in Ireland are grappling with, and I'd encourage people to meet again next term when we're going to explore the 25th anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement and exactly problematize these issues. And these are difficult issues to explore, and that's exactly what we'll be doing in Irish Studies next year, in the next term in a couple of events. So we'll return to that, and that's a serious question to ponder on. There's a question there.
I'd like to visit the idea of the necessity of going to the past in order to get to the future. And I'm thinking of Yeats saying, who will go with Fergus now? And we, the Irish, have lived with our own science fiction in terms of the fairies. The Irish woman in Galway was approached and she says, well, I don't believe in the fairies, but they are there, sir, nevertheless. You know, that part of having, and that is what your students are doing. It's necessary to go to the past in order to get to the future. There is Fergus, there is a Celtic past.
But note that you're mixing here two genres.
Okay.
And I had to be very careful of that in preparing this. In fact, I had a chat with Rowan about it, who would know more than me. There's two genres which seem to us connected, but they're slightly different. Not slightly, I think they're essentially different, but they also have moments of coming together. And both have a huge renaissance at the moment. One would be fantasy, and one would be science fiction. So fantasy traditionally would be imagining a different past, an alternative past. It's creativity in the past. It's not quite science fiction, the examples you gave here. There's a lot of fantasy going on in Irish culture and in Irish mythology and in Irish folklore. Science fiction leads us towards the question of conaverities. Where does the science technology go as you imagine the future? And yet, they're not completely unrelated either. You're right in the notion that there seems to be a connection, and even when you project the future without knowing it, you're actually looking at the past. And that's the surprise that I discovered in looking at this when I thought, well, I'm going to look just at science fiction, not at fantasy. I've dealt a lot with folklore. But certainly, it's not all that different. And yet, there's a competition between the two. At the moment, we seem to be meeting a peak moment of fantasy in popular culture. All the new series that have been screened while this term was going on, of the new Game of Thrones and the new Tolkien are playing around. Fantasy has got a new golden age. Science fiction seems to have taken a backseat. And perhaps, through a conversation with Rowan specifically and with students, maybe it's because some people are thinking maybe we don't have a future anymore. It's not even dystopian. Maybe there is no future. And that's a somber thought to think about. It's easier to look at the past and reimagine a past where there might not be a future. There was a question from somewhere here, from the very back.
Thanks for that. I really enjoyed this talk a lot, Guy. I was really struck by the episode of Star Trek that you were looking at the two different communities that they have to save. And they're both immigrants. And I thought that was so interesting that they're both immigrants. And even the second episode, the battle, the Planet of the Terrorists, right? Neither community seems to have a prior claim to the land that they're on. There's this kind of a question about political autonomy, primarily. So rhetorically, because I'm always an English professor, so I'm always thinking about these kinds of things. Rhetorically, I find it really interesting that there isn't any discussion here about indigeneity, like who was here first, who has the better claim. So you made reference to Palestine and Israel, and that's often framed in terms of indigenous issues, right? The Palestinians have a kind of indigenous claim to the land that the Israelis are violating with their settler status. So I'm just very curious as to the absence of a kind of indigenous discourse and the kind of the insistence on immigration in that episode in particular.
Yeah, I think this is addressed in other episodes in different ways. In this case, you're right. These are two colonies in the first episode I showed who are sent over to planets which are empty. Very, very convenient in both cases. I'm not sure if the language is the language of immigration when it comes to the when it comes there quite clearly, at least with the planet of the stage Englishmen. They're not seen as immigrants per se. Yeah, maybe they are in a sense, but it's not the language of immigration, more the language of colonization. It's not exactly similar, it's not identical discourses. The planet of the terrorists, on the other hand, we don't know who these Ansata is. They might be the indigenous population. So it's kind of echoed there. But these questions are, of course, curious. Who are the real people there? Who are the people who were there before? Who are the people who have rights as coming over? If they're there for 300 years, are they still settlers? A key question for Ireland. You know, it's not only a game of who was here first, but also after centuries, aren't you part of the landscape as well by that stage? Is it just an essential question? Is the question going back to who was the first person here in the day one? Or is it different traditions that developed over time? All these questions are there, but not teased out properly in these episodes, I have to admit. These are very much American, sorry to say this, perceptions, Hollywood American perceptions of stereotypes. In many ways, these episodes are very crude. In trying to give it a reading here, I try to give it an academic reading, and yet these are strikingly crude episodes. Now, years ago when I first saw these episodes, I thought the solution would be to find out what sources are they using. I really wanted to treat it like a literary critic in that sense. I wanted to find out, an historian, what are they using? So I looked up Melinda Snodgrass, who wrote both those episodes. I was dying to know, what are you reading in 1989, 1990? But she'd moved on from then and did out different things. And she more or less said nothing. It had no intention. It was just out of the top of my head. Which is great. That allows me to say what I want as well. But there's no answer to that. But it really is an American, almost facile perception of what's happening in Ireland. So the nuance is missing. A lot of that level of questioning isn't being interrogated. Not in these episodes, at least. There's Marcus, there's others. We could take it's up to you decide, Christian.
I'm glad you mentioned utopia, and it seems to me that what Frederick Jameson suggested about utopia is that what it actually does is to produce more of a contradiction in our reading of history. That what it does is to set an ideal type, but in setting an ideal type shows us exactly what's not possible and yet what might still be possible, and so we're always dealing with that. And in a sense, going back to the indigenous question, the utopian notion that's presented in these episodes may be suggesting that the only or the best solution would be to think about what the original indigenous concept of life might have been. And often seems that Star Trek goes in that direction.
Yep. I think that's interesting, this notion of kind of going back and forth of what we mean here. But again, just to bring it back to these episodes, rather than the wider theoretical question, which doesn't relate to the text that I saw here, I think what's interesting here is not only the essentialization of the Irish stereotype, but the Irish stereotype doesn't change over time. They're timeless, they're ahistorical. The Paddy is the same one in the 19th century as it is in the 22nd century, as it is in the 24th century. And therefore they're seen as a problem because they don't change. So the idea is to mold them into something else in utopia. That's of course also the danger in utopia, is once you can mold people, then it's one person's vision and it's an act of force, it's an act of brutality. One person's utopia will allow them to bring in, as we've seen, that's the story of the 20th century if you wish, the damages of what it can cause. Yeah. I'm wondering how much further, because people have been here, I know, since 4:30, been pulled for a while, but I think that Rowan is a question, so we'll let Rowan introduce me to ask the last question, if it's all right by people. Please.
I'm going to keep this very simple. Both of these episodes take place in space. What does this displacement of Irishness from Ireland indicate about the nature of Irish identity? And alternatively, does this point to an expansion of Irish studies beyond the global into the intergalactic of Irish studies?
Brilliant, Rowan, that's brilliant. And that's why the final question should always be asked by a student, because they will always ask you something that you never thought about, that you couldn't even imagine. And that's what the university is about. So, it is so true that Irish studies is grounded in place and in location. I'd say more than that. One of the big illusions of Irish culture and Irish history is the notion of stability. And I say it's an illusion. You can travel to places and you'll see the same name. You'll go to the O'Briens, and the O'Briens have been living there forever. The Sullivans have been living in the same place forever. You'll go up to Achill Island or to Mayo and you'll meet the Sweeneys, and the Sweeneys go back generations. And it makes you think that nobody moved. It's a static culture. It's locked in place, it's locked in time. But of course, there was lots of migration. There was always migration to Dublin, and there was emigration. And that's an illusion which is there. And as a scholar of memory, I have to deal with that all the time, because memory is often seen as locked in place. But what happens when it emigrates? What happens to its contexts? In some cases, you can come to a place like Boston, and you can create an Irish community, and you can preserve Irish memory. In some places, you might be in the middle of nowhere. Nowhere, some place, but some place without fellow Irish people, and there's no community, and the memories are lost. When I followed Irish memories from the 18th century of people who had been sent for rebelling to different places, those who arrived in America congregated in Philadelphia, in Boston, New York. I could trace their memories. Those who were sent into penal colonies or sent over to the Caribbean, to the West Indies, their memories were lost. It was very hard to trace. Could find traces of it in different places. So this notion of does culture, does identity travel with you, or is it located in place, is a problem. And it's a problem which I think Irish Studies has taken on board, in the sense that it realizes that it has to deal with immigration. It has to deal with migration, and that's why one of the key words in recent years in Irish Studies has been the global Irish. But you're perceptive in this notion that it's not, the notion doesn't have to be tied of moving to another place necessarily. There are certain concepts that travel wherever they go. We have to think about it. And I even think that that joke that was made cynically by, and that's why there's a lot of wisdom in these blogs that I looked at who said, they took the hay with them as well. Yes, they took the hay with them as well. And that's part of the dialogue, by the way, in the episode. The captain says, why do you have to bring on your sheep and animals onto the spaceship? This is the 24th century. And they answer back and say, we can't leave our animals to die. What kind of a new place will we go to? The idea is we're going to start a new society. We need to have the animals with us. It's actually raising very basic questions about biology, about husbandry, about environment, and very basic questions that seem to be primitive questions which are very modern at the same time. And so yes, it's beyond the place and beyond the obvious. And that's a great question. Thank you very much.
And thank you again very much.